And I will share the screen. There we go. Alrighty. So, I think last time we got through this top part here. But just to kind of review that before we move on, we talked about airports and what airports, what their symbology is on sectional charts. So at the most basic level, you'll have airports that don't have any paved runways. And if they don't have any paved runways, you'll have just an empty circle. And if that airport is controlled, it'll be blue. If it is not controlled, it will be this magenta color. If they have a hard surface runway that's greater than 1,500 feet, then you'll see that runway inside of the circle. And it'll be the only part that's not filled in. Otherwise, the circle will be filled in. And that gives you a good indication on the direction of the runway. And this goes up to about 8,000 feet, a little bit over 8,000 feet. So if it goes over 8,000 feet, then you get the outline of the color, and then you get the runways. So there's no circle indicator. So these would probably be bigger airports like Grand Rapids, Detroit, Green Bay. And so you'll have the outline of the runways outlined in the color, blue again for controlled, magenta for uncontrolled. If that airport has a navigational aid on site, such as a VOR or a VOR DME or just a DME or a VORTAC, it'll be indicated by a little dot, and that is indicative of where it is actually located in the airport. So that's helpful, especially for visual pilots when you're flying over an airport to know where that is, and you can see that, and you can kind of identify that airport by that as well. If it's a seaplane based, you'll get a little anchor, so that's pretty easy to remember. So that's just a brief overview of what we talked about. We also talked about different other symbols. So like R means a private airport, H is a heliport, U being an unverified airport, an airport that might not be up to par. Basically, any of these airports that have these symbols down, additional airport information symbols, they will probably not be ones you want to land at. So, yeah, just know that if you see any of these symbols, you probably don't want to land at that airport. But it might be a good navigational aid for when you're flying over it. Another thing is if they have these little hash tick marks on the outside of their airport, they basically mean that the airport has gas. So if you see these, you know that that airport has gas. If it's a bigger airport, obviously that doesn't have a circle. Then you'll have to look in the chart supplement to see if they have gas or not. If they have a runway that's over 8,000 feet, it's very likely that they will have gas at that airport. So, yeah. So we also talked about these little boxes, and these boxes go with every airport. And these basically contain information about the name of the airport, the identifier of the airport, the frequency that you'll communicate on at that airport, whether it be a control tower or a CTAF, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. It also gives you information about what frequency you can get the ADAS on, whether or not they have lighting, the elevation of the airport, unusual traffic patterns, all kinds of stuff. So we'll just kind of take an example and kind of go over it. A lot of airports will not have all this information because they don't have like, a flight service station, or they're not an airport of entry or whatever. So they'll be a lot smaller, but this is all the possible information that you would see in one of these boxes. So just to briefly go over it, let's take a look at an airport. Let's take a look at one maybe we haven't seen. We'll go to a VFR chart here. Let's take a look at Lansing. So Lansing, as you can see, has outlined runways in blue. So we know that the airport has runways that are over 8,000 feet. However, it looks like it has a very small one up in the northeast corner. So that one probably isn't over 8,000 feet, but they have at least one over 8,000 feet. It is blue, so we know it's a controlled field. It has a star above the airport, and the star means that they have a tower that is lit, or a beacon on the top of the tower that's lit. So they'll have a beacon rotating at night. And also, fun fact, beacons also are lit when the airport goes below IFR conditions. So if the airport's ever below IFR conditions or sunset to sunrise, that airport's beacon will be lit. And so if they have that little symbol, that's what that means. Looking at the airport box, we can see that the name of the airport is Capital Region International. And the identifier for that is LAN, Lima Alpha November. And also, as a side note, all airports in the United States begin with the letter K in their ICAO abbreviation. So that is not included in here. That's just part of the international standard. All airports in the U.S. just have a 3-letter identifier, and then outside of the U.S., they're identified with their 4-letter identifier, which includes the ICAO prefix, which in the U.S. is K for some reason. I don't know. So the full identifier for Lansing would be KLAN, but in the U.S., you can just do LAN. So that's the name of the identifier. Then you have CT, which indicates the control tower frequency. Being this is a controlled airport, they have a control tower, and you can ring them up on 119.9. Now, at controlled airports, that's probably not the frequency that you would get when you're coming in there. You'd probably call them up on approach, or if you're departing, you would use the clearance frequency, which you would get from probably chart supplement, which we'll look at here in a little bit. But they have that. Next, you can see ATIS. So this is the weather information. So you can get ATIS, and also has other information. Also has airport information, so if they close any taxiways or for runways out of commission or something like that. That'll be on 119.75. So any information about the airport, including weather, will be on 119.75, and that is a recorded message that gets updated periodically throughout the day. And as a side note to that, they're assigned a letter, and when you call up approach or when you call up clearance departing the airport, they will have you state that you have the current information identified by that letter inside the ATIS. So it might be information Bravo or information Delta or whatever that information is. They'll put that in the recording. So you can get that information on 119.75. So going down to the next row here, we have 861, which is the airport elevation. This is a great way to check your altimeter setting when you're taking off. So maybe you don't have like the correct altimeter. Let's say the ATIS is down, and so you can't get the altimeter information from the ATIS. And so what you could do is you could set your altimeter to 861, and that way you know that it's set correctly instead of setting it based on pressure. Or if you do set it based on pressure, you can also check it against this and make sure that your altimeter is working. If it has an L here, this means the airport has lighting available. In this case, lighting is available 24/7 without restrictions. If it had, for instance, like Grand Rapids here, they have a little star by the L. This means that the lighting might not be available all the time. You'll have to check the chart supplement to see what those times are, what the limitations to that lighting is. So L means lighting, specifically runway lighting. 85, this is the length of the longest runway. So at Lansing, the longest runway is 8,500 feet long. You just add 2 zeros to that. And so 8,500 is the length of the longest paved runway. Next, you have 122.95. So this is the Unicom frequency. Unicom is not the CTAF frequency. This is a different frequency, and it's used to communicate with like an FBO or maybe a hangar, some company that owns hangars there, or anybody else that is not necessarily going to be involved with actual direction of air traffic. So if you need fuel, you call up Unicom, they get you fuel. If you need some other service, call up Unicom. So that's what that number is. AOE at the bottom, this is kind of a unique identifier. This is an airport of entry. And so if you were to fly like from Canada to the United States, you could land at Lansing and you could go through customs and you would be able to be processed there. Other airports like Grand Rapids, and I don't think Flint is. Any airport that's around the border probably is going to be an airport entry. Battle Creek right here is not, for instance. So anything on the east side of the state that's a bigger airport probably is going to be an airport of entry. So that's what the AOE means. So that's basically all we talked about last time. So I guess before we continue on with some of the other symbology, does anybody have any questions about any of those symbols or what they mean or any of the boxes? All right. So I guess we will get started with the next section. So airport traffic, service, and airspace information. So these are basically going to be your airspaces, as well as some other special use things like federal airways, military operating areas, prohibited areas, training routes, all those things we're going to talk about here. So we've talked a little bit about different airspace and how they're indicated on a sectional chart, but to refresh our memories, we have Class Bravo, which is going to be a solid blue line. Class Charlie is this kind of magenta color. Class D is going to be the dashed blue line. If you have a box like this is going to contain the information of how high the class delta goes to. And that'll be inside of this dashed blue line, and you'll see that, and that's just telling you how high it goes. Class Echo airspace, that is not like a normal Class Echo. That would be starting at 1,200 feet. This is going to be a Class Echo that starts at the surface. So if you see a dashed magenta line, that means you have Class Echo to the surface. If you have this magenta gradient, this is going to be the Class E transition area. So inside of that starts at 700 feet, and then outside of that, Class E starts at 1,200 feet. We have the blue line, or the blue gradient here. And this is going to be a Class E with a floor of 1,200 feet that basically backs up to a Class G airspace. This little thing right here where you have like this, I don't even know what kind of pattern this is. Whatever kind of pattern this is, indicates that you have different floors of Class E that are not necessarily at 700 feet. And I think, let me see if I can find one of these. I know there's one. I know there's one over by Detroit, I think. I might not be able to find it. I thought there was one over here. Oh well. It's okay. Basically this, if you see this on a sectional chart somewhere, it just means that the Class E airspace that exists there has different floors. So it might not start at 700 feet. It might start at some other height. In this case, it'll be indicated by the numbers that are there. And I don't know if I've mentioned this. MSL, if you see MSL, that means that it starts at mean sea level. The other type of altitude is going to be above ground level. And so those will be two different types of altitudes that you'll see on charts. Mean sea level being adjusted for pressure, ground obviously just being the height above the ground. So next we have the Federal Airways. Now, oftentimes as VFR pilots, you probably won't use these. However, you can if you want. I mean, they're established routes on sectional charts, and so they're good for navigation. They go between navigational aids, so basically between VORs, and on the Federal Airway, you have a designated radial that you're tracking. And if you follow that, you'll basically end up right at the nav aid. So it's pretty helpful for navigation. These are Class E. They're also, for reference, 8 miles wide, so 4 miles on each side of the airway. And so, yeah, they're used quite extensively by like IFR traffic and other more established VFR traffic. So if you're going long cross country, they're kind of good for that stuff. They also are named. So if they, like this one is V69, so Victor Airway 69, and all of them have a name that you can use for that. Below the airway, you'll see boxes that will give you distance between the nav-aid points, and so you can use that also in your flight planning. If you see this little symbol here, this little star with a circle in the middle, this is going to be an RNAV waypoint. And if you have GPS or something else, or radio navigation that can pick that up, you can use that as a waypoint as well when you're planning your VFR flight. But we'll talk about different things to use for checkpoints in a little bit. So these little hash kind of lines coming out of this solid line, I don't know, whatever kind of pattern you want to ascribe to this. Both of these are for prohibited / warning areas and MOAs. So prohibited, restricted, warning, Canadian advisory, danger, and restricted areas all get this blue. And then if it's an alert area or a MOA, they're indicated in magenta. And basically, these are used by the military in areas where they don't necessarily want pilots going on a regular basis, in the case of prohibited and restricted areas at all. And this is just to keep pilots safe from dangers that might not be available on any particular sources. They just don't want you going there. So for instance, around Area 51 and some of the other classified sites around the US, they are prohibited areas. You cannot go there. So if they're blue like this, you shouldn't go there. If they're magenta like this, however, you can fly in these all you want. Now, there are certain times in which these are active, and if you fly in one while it's active, it's likely that or it's possible that you could interfere with some of their activities, and they probably won't be too happy with you doing that. So it's one thing to be cautious about. It's not illegal to fly in a hot MOA, but you should definitely take that into consideration, because the people that are using that probably aren't worried about you. And you can find out the active times by calling up the controlling agency for that particular MOA and seeing if it's active or not. And even if it has posted active times, it's good to still check just to make sure that they haven't scheduled anything outside of those active times. And again, we'll look at all these in a second. Special airport traffic area, these aren't really that prevalent here, more like special airspace areas. There's some in Alaska and some other different unique regions with special traffic rules, but you probably wouldn't have to worry about those too much. ADIZ, so these are borders. So along the Canadian border, Mexico border, you'll have an ADIZ, and the ADIZ is basically a zone which when you're going to be going through it, you have to have a special flight plan for VFR pilots, at least. So for VFR pilots, you have to have what's called a Defense VFR Flight Plan, or DVFR. And that's just basically to help the government or whoever is controlling that border know that you're crossing it and that you've planned everything out and that you filed the right paperwork and you've gotten the defense VFR flight plan, so they will not come after you when you go through an ADIS. If you go through an ADIS without filing one of those as a VFR pilot, they will come after you. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There's a special flight plan for going through an ADIS, and the ADIS separates the borders. This solid magenta line is for Mode C Vail. And these are common around big Class B airports. They're about 30 miles out, and basically they require you to have your transponder on and operating inside that Mode C Vail, and it just helps with traffic flow inside that Class Bravo airspace. Even if you're not inside the Class Bravo, it's good for them to know where you're at so they can route traffic and just keep an eye on all the airplanes that are flying around that Class Bravo. This kind of bigger dashed magenta line is just a national security area. So anywhere that they want to protect, they will have those. TERSAs, these are the Class C wannabes. They're at airports that are Class Delta that happen to have an operating radar station. These are going to be phased out eventually. I don't know when, but at some point in the future, these will probably be gone. But basically, it's a way to tie in an antiquated old system with a newer system. So at Class D airports, where they have an operating radar station, you'll have a TERSA. And again, it's an option to opt into using that TERSA. If you opt into it, you will basically use the airport like a Class C airport. If you choose not to, then it's just a Class D airport. So it's just a way to get some extra services and to provide more separation from other traffic if you're using that airport. So last one here is a military training route. So these are established flyways that the military uses. So if you're on one of these and it's active, you probably should watch out for jet because jets will go right by you. And when they're going really fast, it's hard for them to see you. And yeah, you wouldn't want anything bad to happen. So you should check when these are hot, just like going through a MOA, and you should not be on them when they're hot. So yeah. All right, let's take a look at all these different airspace and special use areas on sectional charts. So I guess the first one we can look at is all the classes of airspace. We've done this, but we'll just go over it again real quick. So here we have the solid magenta gradient, and this basically means that inside it's going to be 700 feet is where Class Echo starts. So Class Echo starts at 700 feet, and then below that is going to be Class Golf airspace. So surface to 700 feet is Class Golf, 700 feet, all the way up to, I think actually in this case, I don't know, I have to check on whether or not this is Class G, because I think the UP is still Class G. But anyway, starting at 700 feet is Class Echo. But there might be some confusion with the Class Golf up here. So anyway. And then outside this ring, it's going to be Class Echo starting at 1,200 feet. So everything below that is Class Golf. So outside the ring is going to be Class Golf from the surface to 1,200 feet, and then from 1,200 feet up is going to be Class Echo. Inside the ring, Class Golf to 700 feet, and then from 700 feet up is going to be Class Echo. So it's just a Class E transition area. Over here, we have another one of those special symbols. So this is a Class E transition area, but on top of that, we also have the dashed magenta line. And the dashed magenta line is Class E to the surface. So inside of that, everything is Class E down to the surface. And the reason that airports have these is because they have some sort of instrument approach, and they don't want you, basically it's for visual flight rules. So instead of Class G flight rules, you have to follow Class E flight rules, and it just helps with traffic and stuff like that. Here at KI Sawyer, we have the dashed blue line, and so this airport is going to be Class Delta. And here we have the box that we talked about. So this indicates the top of the Class Delta. So in this case, the Class Delta goes to 3,700 feet. And any class delta you look at will have this little box that will identify that. I think Green Bay, here we go. So Green Bay has the solid magenta lines, and actually has two of them, and that's because it's a Class C airport. So Class C will have these two magenta lines, an inner ring and an outer ring. The inner ring is 5 miles, and then it's another 5 miles to the outer ring, so it's a total of 10 miles. And anything inside of the solid inner core here is going to be a different height than the one in the outer core. So they have different heights that they start at. In this inner core, we have the surface to 4,700 feet. And so the Class C goes all the way down the surface up to 4,700 feet, which is the top of the Class Charlie. Then the outer ring, if you can kind of think of this like a upside down cake, it's going to start at 1,900 feet and go to 4,700 feet. And so it's kind of tiered like that. So the outer ring starts at higher elevation than the inner ring, which goes to the surface, and has the solid magenta, which is the Class Charlie. And I think we have to go, to World VFR. We can look at Class Bravo. So Class Bravo is the solid blue, and this is reserved for the busiest airports. And I think, so goes all the way out here, which is quite a ways. Now, Class Bravo does not have a designated set pattern that it follows, so it is more like an upside down cake, but depending on where it's at, it really depends on what it's shaped like. So they're all unique in their own way, and so you can't really specify what they look like. They will be in an upside down cake fashion, like Class Charlie, but how big they are and where they start and stuff is all dependent on their area. So in this case, just like Class C, the innermost ring will start at the surface and it'll go up to 10,000 feet. Then they'll progressively get higher up as you go out. So 1,900 feet, 30,000 or 3,000 feet, 3,600 feet, 4,000 feet, etc. And here we can see this solid magenta line bordering that 30 miles out. That's going to be your mode C veil. So anything inside of that, they want you on a transponder so that they can see where you're at. And that goes all the way down to the surface. So that doesn't start at this elevation. That starts at the surface. All right, so that's just a quick recap on sectional charts and airspace. So let's talk about some of the other things that we haven't seen yet. So here we have MOA. So we can see the hashed lines, the hashed magenta lines that go in, around the perimeter of this MOA. And MOA stands for Military Operating Area. And inside that MOA, they have specified operating times, which they will put on chart supplements and such. And so you know when these MOAs are active, but you are not prohibited from going inside a MOA if it's not, or if it is active or if it's not active. So you can go in them anytime you want, but you should be aware when they're active. There's jets flying around in there. They may not be looking for you. And so, that's just, this is the Hershey MOA. And so you can see that's what the name is. And on a chart, you can look up the controlling agency for those MOAs. They're posted up on the top here somewhere. Here they are. So here you can see the controlling agency on the top of the sectional chart. So the Hershey MOA tells you some other information, the altitude, times of use, and the controlling center. So this is who you contact to see if it was active or not. Over here we have a restricted area. Now this restricted area happens to be inside a MOA, but regardless of that fact, when this restricted area is active, you cannot go inside of it. So, but probably should make sure that you know whether or not it's active or not before you go inside of it, because you are not allowed inside of those, and they will intercept you to make sure you stay out. So blue hash lines indicate restricted areas, and they also have their own name designation. So it'll say restricted, and they'll give you the restricted area number. So yeah, restricted areas, do not go in those. MOAs are okay to go in, but you should definitely check whether or not it's hot. All right, let's see if I can find, here we go. So just gonna pick this random airport here. This airport happened to have a DME or a VOR on site, and you can see it has the right in the center of the airport. And on the outside of the DME or the VOR or the VORTAC or whatever it is, it's gonna have these little radials. This one's kind of hard to see because it kind of overlaps the airport, but any of these VORs are gonna have this radial thing on this compass. This indicates the radials going out. A VOR has 360 individual radials, and they go out from it. And these are what are used for the Victor Airways. So Victor Airways going out here. So we have the 320 radial going out of the VOR. And this is Victor Airway V228. And we can see that this is 31 nautical miles between this VOR and this VOR, which is the Dell's VOR. And so those are all over. So you can see all the Victor Airways, all these blue lines, and they all have numbers and good navigational aids. In fact, these intersections here are going to be 5 letters, and they're usually always pronounceable. And so in this case, this is the rando intersection. And so this you'll see on like flight plans for jets and stuff. They'll use these, and they'll put the rando intersection in as a waypoint. And you can easily triangulate your position because you have 2 incoming or 3 incoming VORs, and you can triangulate your position here pretty easily. But we'll talk about radio navigation at some point in the future. So, let's see, what was the talked about all those. Oh, an ADIS. Let's see if we can find an ADIS here. Let's go back to World VFR. All right, so here we can see the border of Michigan and Canada. It kind of goes all the way down here, and it follows the border. And so when you're flying around the border, even though it's not marked as an ADIS, you're required to have a DVFR flight plan. So to cross that border, you have to have a DVFR flight plan. And it's not, in this case, indicated as an ADIS. But in the case that you do see an ADIS with this one is just a solid magenta line, but they have the dots there as well. You have to have a DVFR flight plan as a VFR pilot to cross that. So in this case, it just has the border with the country and the state, and then on the other side, the country and the province or the state or whatever it is. But yeah, just know that when you cross this border, that you're required to have a DVFR flight plan. Now, interestingly enough, if you were to fly around this airport here, this airport is right on the border. And in fact, you might go across the border in order to be in the pattern for this airport. And that's actually 100% fine. So you can cross this border anytime you would like. You don't need to have like special customs or anything. You just need to make sure that you're on the proper flight plan. And you can go around, as long as you don't land on the other side, you can totally cross this border. No problems. You don't have to have customs clearance or a passport or anything. Just so long as you don't land on the other side. So that's just another interesting thing to think about. All right. I think the only other thing we didn't talk about was Yes, military training routes. So there are two different types of military training routes. There are these kind, which are VR, and then there are another kind, which are IR. VR meaning visual, and IR meaning instrument. So these are used by the military for different purposes, and they each have their own designation. So we have, VR 1666 and VR 1648. And these cross all over the place. And here's another IR 6069-61. Basically, you want to make sure that you're not going to, if you do cross one, you're not on it. You cross it at a 90-degree angle. You don't want to be on them for too long, and you make sure that they're not active when you're crossing. These are usually low-level routes, and so if you're flying at 10,000 feet or whatever, I wouldn't worry too much about them, but just know that those do exist and that you don't want to be on those for too long. If you're at a low level, when they're active, you will be run up on by jets. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. So the gray lines are the military training routes. Okay, kind of flew through that. Any questions on any of those things? Any of the airspace or special use?
For the, what was it, restricted zones, is that from sea level or ground level all the way to space, or does that have a cutoff?
Yeah. So let's see here. Let's take this restricted area. So restricted 6903. And I think, let's see. It wouldn't be on this one. It would be on the other one. Yes, here they are. So at the top, like the MOAs, they also have a box for them. So you can look up R6903, and you can see the altitude goes up to 45,000 feet. So that would be the cutoff in this case. Obviously, I guess they don't have a set time that they're active. So you get a NOTAM when that area is active. So yeah, so you can find information about the restricted areas and the MOAs both at the top of these sectional charts. And so they give you the controlling agency, the altitude, and when they're active normally. But I would also always make sure to contact the center to make sure that you're not accidentally going into a hot MOA that's not posted. So, all right, any other questions? All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is these little com boxes, and these are going to be at your navigational aids. So VORs, DME, whatever it is, any nav aid is going to have this box. And the useful thing that you can get out of this is the name of the nav aid, the type of services it offers, and if they offer like a flight service station frequency. So let's take a look at Houghton, because Houghton has one. So the Houghton VOR DME, again, you see the dot indicating its location at the airport. If it's not at an airport, it has a different symbol. Let's see if I can find one. It's not at an airport. Well, anyway, they have these symbols if they're not at an airport. They just indicate what kind of nav aid it is. So if you see one that's not at an airport, that's what these are. In this case, it's at an airport, so it has the dot. And it has the radials going out as well. So it has that compass and has the radials that you can use. But anyway, this box. So this box tells us that this is a VOR DME at the top. So basically that means that it is, the acronym for VOR again is a very high frequency omnidirectional range, but nobody ever says that, and it's kind of a ridiculous acronym anyway. So it's a VOR. Basically, you can get radial information from that. And in this case, it also has a DME, which means as distance measuring equipment. So it can tell you how far away you are from the center of that VOR. Below that, it tells you that the name of the station is Houghton. It won't always be the name of the airport. For instance, there was a lot of confusion about the one near Grand Rapids, and it was named, I think, Grand Rapids for a while, and there was confusion amongst whether or not they were talking about the airport or they were talking about the DME, because they're actually in two different locations, and so they changed the name of that one to the Victory VOR. In this case, it's the airport, so it's called the Houghton VOR. You have the frequency that you would tune into, so these are radio navigational aids. And so you need to tune into a frequency in order to use it. And so you would put 112.8 in this case into your navigational radios, and you'd be able to tune into the VOR. It tells you the channel of the VOR. That's sometimes useful, but I'm not going to talk about that. It also gives you the identifier. So in this case, the CMX airport. This is the Houghton County Memorial Airport. I do want to show you one that's not in an airport, because so like in this case, this one's not in an airport. This is the Victory VOR, and it has a different identifier, so VIO. In this case, this one is at an airport, and so it has the same identifier, CMX. But that's not always the case. And then the next thing here is Morse code. So this Morse code is what you would hear if you tried to listen to the VOR. So if you tune to this frequency in your radios and you listen to it, this is what would be broadcasting from it. So besides radio frequency, it also has some audio. And this is what you'd use in the event that you wanted to make sure that the VOR was active, because if the VOR is disabled or not active for some reason, that Morse code will not be going over the radios. And so every time you use a VOR, you should check it by listening to it and make sure that you hear these Morse code symbols. And these correspond to the letters of the station. So in this case, it's CMX, and that's what the Morse code is representing. So make sure before you use a VOR, you tune to it and you listen to it and make sure it has the Morse code. That way you know that you can use it and that it's reliable-ish. So yeah, and you tune that to 112.8 for that VOR. Now, this VOR is special. It also has some other additional services that it offers. So on the outside of the box here, we have two different frequencies. We have 122.525 and we have 255.4. We also have this down here, which says Green Bay. Now, this means that when you tune to this frequency or this frequency, you'll be able to get flight service station on this VOR. And so basically, the flight service station will tune to these frequencies off this VOR, and they'll kind of like remote in, I guess. They'll talk to you through the VOR. And the flight service station, again, is the people that you talk to about flight plans, weather, if you want to report a PIREP. Again, they're kind of going out of service, sort of. There's different ways. Most people don't use them. They were used a lot in the past, but now they're kind of falling out of service. But anyway, these are people that you could talk to that sit in a room, and they'll give you weather updates and flight information and all kinds of stuff. So if you ever want to talk to them, you can call up 122.525, and you'd be talking to the Green Bay flight service station through this VOR. Some VORs do not have this capability, and so they won't have that extra stuff. Some might have an R here. If they have an R after frequency, it means that they can only receive on that frequency. So that was the frequency that would use to talk to the flight service station. And you would listen on 122.8, the VOR frequency. Or if they had a different frequency that didn't have that capability or that limitation, you could use that instead, whatever the case. So VOR, frequency, identifier, Morse code, make sure it's working. Then on the outside, sometimes you'll have flight service station frequencies and the name of the station that that serves that VOR. All right. So that's what that box means. Yeah, pretty sure. Also, some will have either an A or sometimes they'll have an H in them. If they have an A, it means that they have an ASOS or an AWOS, which is basically weather information. If they have an H, it's a high WOS, which is for hazardous in-flight weather. So sometimes you'll see an H or an A, and you might see a question on that. It means as either high WOS or an ASOS, AWOS at that VOR. These are all the different types of symbols that you'll see for radio navates. So like a VOR DME or a DME or a VORTAC that are not at airports. The other way you can identify them pretty quickly is by the compass around them as well. NDBs are something that's going out of service slowly as well. They don't give you any specific information, except they'll tell you that you're either going towards the station or not towards the station. So yeah, they're kind of helpful, but not really. But they're going out of service. So those might not be there for too long, but they're another type of radio navigation aid, but not as helpful as VORs. All right, obstructions. So these are going to be towers, wind turbines, wind turbine farms, anything that might stick up into the sky. So your basic tower here is going to be this little shape, whatever this is. And if it's really tall, like this one, it's going to be above 1,000 feet AGL. All of these are going to be AGL, and that's just helpful for not messing with your whatever your calibrated altitude is for pressure. This gives you solid AGL reading, and that's just so you don't run into them. So, you know, if you're 100 feet off the ground and this is a 1,000-foot tower, you're going to run into it. So pretty straightforward. If it's below 1,000 feet and above 200 feet, you're going to see this little tower. It's just a smaller little triangle. If it's a wind turbine, you're going to have a little wind turbine symbol. If they're grouped, you're going to have little groups of turbines or towers or small towers or whatever. And if they're lit anytime during the day, they'll have these little like lightning bolts or little lines coming out of it. So also wind turbine farms, you'll see like a line around it. You'll see a bunch of little turbines in there, and they give you the elevation. Now this one, they give in mean sea level. So yeah, they also give it to you in ground level, but anyway. So let's see if we can find some examples of these. All right, so here we go. Here's a tower. So in this case, this is above 200 feet, but below 1,000 feet. So this is the small triangle, just some tower. The elevation of this tower in mean sea level is 13,096 feet. And then they also give you the height and ground level, so above ground level. So it's going to be 347 feet above ground level. So not a very high tower, but something to be aware of. Let's see if we can find a bigger tower. There are not too many around here. Let's see if we can go over here. Here we go. So here we have a group of towers. So we have a high tower and some small towers. You can see this tower has a height above ground level of 1,080 feet, and we have a height of mean sea level at 19,000 or 1,920 feet. So MSL, AGL. We have a grouping of high tower and a small tower. Here you can see one that has a lit tower, probably lit at night. So it starts at, or it ends at 1,058 feet above ground level, or 1953 mean sea level. And then, yes, here we go. So the wind turbine farms over by Flint, Saginaw area. We can see all the little turbines inside this little dashed blue line. And we can see that as long as you're above 1,236 feet, that you won't run into any of these towers, and that's going to be in mean sea levels. So that's just to be something to be aware of. And those are really cool too, by the way, if you fly over those at night, all of them blink in unison. And yeah, it's just a pretty cool experience. Anecdotal note. So yeah, that's towers. So pretty straightforward. Big towers for tall towers, small towers for small towers. Lightning bolts for lit, wind turbines for wind turbines. So yeah, pretty straightforward. All right, so these are all little just symbols that you might see out there, but you know, whatever, they're miscellaneous. So if you see a glider, and the glider will have this little diamond shape, and inside that diamond will have some letter, means that that airport has some sort of activity that's not standard. So in this case, if it has an A inside the glider, it means it has aerobatic practice area. So you have to look at the chart supplement to see what that means. It has a G, it means it has glider operations. So the glider doesn't necessarily mean glider operations, by the way. It means any of these. So if you see a glider, not necessarily glider operations. If you see a G, it means it does have a glider operations. H for hang glider, U for ultralight, UA for unmanned aircraft, so drones. If you see a parachute, it means that there are parachute jumpers that around that airport. Diamonds means there's a stadium there. In this case, it also means that there could be an intermittent TFR site there. So these are big stadiums like Green Bay, Detroit, big NFL stadiums or other stadiums. These little blue circles just are marine lights, so those are kind of helpful for navigation at night. These are these VFR waypoints. So 5-letter identifier, and these are helpful for navigating during the day and letting the towers know that you're communicating with where you're at, because they'll know where these waypoints are. Space shuttle, space launch, pretty straightforward. Now these we'll talk about more when you get into actual navigation, but these are isogonical lines. And basically this is the deviation of the magnetic field on that line. And so that's what you'd use to correct for the magnetic error in your compass. If you see this little flag, it means that this is another VFR waypoint. So you can use that when you're communicating with a tower to help them identify where you're at. We'll also go through this and then we'll kind of look at all these. So these little power line things means there's a power line there. The little dashed line of boxes at the end is an aerial cable. So triangle with a circle is a lookout tower, and it'll have the elevation of the tower as well. Mountain pass, we don't really have any mountains on this side of the state, but if you see that, it'll give you the elevation of the pass as well. All right, let's look at a few of these symbols. I happen to know that. Yes, Ionia. So Ionia County Airport has this, and this glider means that they have some sort of unusual activity. In this case, it means that they have gliders. So they have glider operations that go out of there occasionally, and so that's just something to be aware of. Let's see if we can find another airport. Oh yes, there it is. Padgham Airport down here and near Allegan. They have a little parachute, and so occasionally they'll probably have parachute activities there, and so that's just something else to be aware of. And we can check the chart supplement for that information. I know there is. I thought there was a stadium down here somewhere. Could be wrong. Oh, here's an NDB, by the way. That's what NDB would look like, non-directional beacon. I thought there was a stadium. Oh, well. I know there's one over here. So right here, Green Bay Stadium, obviously. The Packers. So stadium. Let's see. Here we have a power line symbol. So along here, you can see a power line. And often these are good for navigational aids during the daytime because these are often cut through trees. And so finding those is nice. And those are helpful kind of as navigational aids. I think there are, yes. So all these airports here, Sparta, Greenville, Ionia, Lowell, these all have flags on them. And so all these airports are VFR checkpoints. And so when you're flying near Grand Rapids down here, you can use any of these airports as a checkpoint. So you could say, oh, you can call up Grand Rapids to be like, Grand Rapids approach, Cessna, whatever is just over Sparta. And their traffic control at Grand Rapids would know exactly where that's at. And so that's helpful for them to kind of pinpoint where your location is. And so they can get you better services. Other little things will just have names. So cities will be on here. So like Grand Rapids will be here. Any of the smaller cities will be here. Belding, Ionia, they'll have names. Also unusual structures. So like down in Grand Rapids, they have an unusual structure, the pyramid. And you can see this quite clearly from the air. And so they'll label it here for help with VFR checkpoints. In Ionia, there's prisons, and those are pretty identifiable as well. And so any unusual structure they'll put on here to kind of help with navigational aids. Another one that was not on the legend, but this is another thing to be aware of is these little circles with these like ovals. And this is a race car track. So anytime you see those, kind of look like paper clips or something, I don't know, that's a race car track. And so it's another good navigational aid. So yeah, that's kind of all the symbology, and I don't expect you to memorize all this right off the bat. It takes a long time to go through this and look at all the symbology and kind of recognize what it is. But it is helpful just kind of keep looking at it and kind of remembering what's what and figuring out what's where. And over time, you'll get a lot better at recognizing these symbols with a lot of practice. But that's why they have the legend there. So, yeah. Any questions? Anything we kind of buzzed through there in the last section about anything we covered? Any of these symbols or anything else?
You go look at the Appleton Airport. There's some obstructions that say tank on them. And I can't find any. Yeah, right next to the Appleton Airport, right above Oshkosh.
Let's see here. Oshkosh is down here somewhere, right?
You're south. You're very south.
Oh, whoops. Oh, I am south. There it is. Appleton.
So right next to the airport. It's just north. Yeah, there you go. It's just north of Oshkosh.
Oh, yes, there it is.
I could tell someone's not a Wisconsin native.
No, I am not. I'm from Michigan. Anyway, so yeah, so it says tank.
Yeah, I don't get that.
So my guess is that this tower is some sort of tank, like a fuel holding tank or like a silo or something. And so
it's 1,000 feet tall.
Yeah, so these are in mean sea level, so these aren't the actual heights. Like
that would do it.
Yeah, so like they're probably only 200 feet high, but I guess they're just wanting to identify that these are not like cell towers or something. These are like different. So they'll put like tank or some other identifier there. So yeah, that's those are. They're not like tanks. So yeah.
They do have a military museum down there. You never know.
Oh yeah, you never know. That'd be a really big tank. All right. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Well, yeah. I guess the only thing I could say is just, go through these sectional charts, just look at them. You can go on skyvector.com for sectional charts, just look through all the symbols, and once you get familiar with them, they're not that hard to remember. They're pretty straightforward. So, and it'll be helpful for when we get into flight planning. So that'll be our next thing, is we'll kind of start talking about flight planning and how to do all that. So yeah, that basically wraps up intro to sectional charts and symbology. So next week we'll probably start on flight planning, and we'll kind of go from there. So yeah. Stop recording.